What's up, everybody? This is the Strange Land podcast. My name is Kenny. I'm here with my friend Stephan. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How you guys doing tonight?
Hey, you know what? I'm doing pretty good. Doing pretty good.
Awesome. Before we get the show started, special shout out to Heinrika, our German ambassador of the show. We got an email, a really nice email from her last week, so we just wanted to show a little love.
Yeah, it was our first email. I remember I was kind of sick and I was in bed and I was about to get up to start writing the notes for this podcast, tonight's episode. And I saw the email and I didn't want to get up. It was like 6 in the morning and I saw it and I was like, yes,
Yeah,
got to get up and do this. So much motivation. So, yeah, we really appreciate that email.
definitely. I had to say when I read it, I was pretty stoked. Made my day.
It
So,
seriously did. And one other thing, just let you guys know, our website's www.strangelandpod.com. You can check us out on iTunes, Google Play, basically any podcast app, and on YouTube as well. If you just search up the Strangeland podcast, we'll come up. So today we're taking you back 41 years in the past, and we're talking about something that is so horrific. It actually hurt quite a bit doing all the research. Mentally, it was very exhausting, honestly. The things that happened to the victim in this case are so bad that they were examined and used by the FBI as a way to determine the best ways to survive if you are captured and tortured. Today, we are talking about the kidnapping and torture of Colleen Stan, the girl in the box. In this episode, we will be discussing topics that deal with torture, psychology, the use of extreme manipulation, and Stockholm Syndrome. And this is another episode that is incredibly gruesome, and for some people, it may be hard to listen to. It deals with constant rape, torture, and dehumanization of a young female. However, it will also give us insight onto what exactly happened to Colleen Stan and how strong a human being can be, and what we can survive through when there is even a sliver of hope. In tonight's episode, that really rings true because things are so insane with what happened tonight. You have to question, how did she survive, and
Definitely.
how did she not go absolutely mental given the circumstances?
yeah, it's a sign of the human will, really. It's
Yeah,
pretty amazing
it really
what this
is.
lady went through. So the lady we're talking about tonight, her name is Colleen Stan. She was a 20-year-old female who lived in the town of Eugene, Oregon. On May 19th, 1977, Colleen decided that she was going to a friend's birthday party in Northern California. For various reasons, she had decided to hitchhike to get there. This was something Colleen had done in the past and was relatively comfortable doing it. She said that she would try to look at the vehicle and whoever was picking her up to determine if she deemed it safe or if it seemed like a risk. She would even turn some people down if she didn't like the feeling of it. On the day in question, Cameron and Janice Hooker stopped in their blue van and picked up Colleen. Colleen stated that she felt safe getting into the vehicle because it was a family. They had had their baby in the car and seemed like everything was fine. After a while of driving, Colleen had to use the restroom, so they stopped at a gas station. While she was in the restroom, she recalls having this overwhelming thought to just run, and she tells herself in a couple interviews that her brain basically tells her to jump out of the window and get out any way she can. She gets into a frantic state.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't explain this feeling again because she felt like she could trust the family, but it was always in the back of her head. So after she calmed down and reassured herself that everything was going to be fine, she got back into the van. They drove for a while, and then once in an isolated area, they got off of the highway, and Cameron pulled out a knife and put it up to Colleen's throat. While still in the vehicle, Cameron forced Colleen to put a 20-pound wooden box that was locked over her head. This box prevented her from seeing or hearing anything around her. Cameron was a skilled carpenter, and that will become very apparent as the story progresses. The box Cameron made Colleen put her head in while still in the van was almost unbearable if you look at the pictures. It's hard to imagine a head fitting into this box. And imagine, so as soon as she gets out of the restroom, she already has these terrible, frantic feelings to escape. She walks back to the car, she gets in, and she sees the box. It's already sitting on the seat next to her, so she sits down next to it. And I think in an interview she said she remembered seeing it and being like, what the hell is that? But
it could be in her eyes before he put the knife up to her throat and she's just sitting there next to this box. It could be anything, really. It doesn't necessarily who sees a box like that and thinks, well, my head's going into that.
Yeah, totally.
So she's not. I'm sure she doesn't have. I'm sure she might be curious as to what this box is.
Yeah.
But she probably doesn't have, any strange feelings about it necessarily because it's such an obscure thing to do.
Right.
I mean, how many times has someone been kidnapped and then had their head forced into a box while in the car?
Exactly.
Like never. So. And so this is something that you sort of hear about or see or whatever. When someone hitchhikes a lot, they look at the car and they look at the people inside.
Right.
And, for the most part, that probably works out, although I can't imagine too many families are picking up hitchhikers.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was just me and my girlfriend and her kid or whatever, it's just like our family, I'm probably not picking up anybody.
Right.
Which I'm not going to pick up anyone anyways, honestly, but especially not in that situation,
Yeah, in her recollection of the day, she says that another van stopped before they picked her up, and it was a car, and there was like 5 or 6 guys in there, and she checked the situation out and was like, she told them to just keep going. She was like, never mind.
Yeah.
And
so she was trying to be as safe as possible.
Right.
And she just got the short end of the stick with this one, honestly.
Well, yeah, and it's a testament of like, you don't know people's true intentions, no matter how innocent they may seem to look.
Yeah, the don't judge a book by its cover rings as true as ever.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
This situation. So, we don't know a lot about Cameron or Janice's early life. We know that Cameron was born in a city in California named Alturas on November 5th, 1953. And he was abused as a kid, and he moved around a lot, and they didn't really settle anywhere until he was in his late teens. And he met Janice when he was only 15 years old, and she was also abused, and she didn't really have any relationships before Cameron. And this is something that you sort of see. It seems like Cameron, his whole life is sort of centered around finding people that he can manipulate and abuse and take control of.
Right.
And it all starts with Janice at a very young age. She's 15, he's 16, and he finds someone at that age who has tons of issues and who can easily be manipulated, and he does so.
Yeah, he takes advantage of it like a true narcissist.
And he marries her, which we'll find out is sort of a forced marriage. It was one of those things where he had almost as much control over her as the other victims in this case.
Yeah, totally. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, have you ever hitchhiked before?
No, I have not.
No?
No, I'm like a scaredy cat. And I have tons of anxiety in general, so there's no way. I think if I had a gun on me,
You'd feel better.
I'd be more tempted to do it because if the dude pulled out, I don't know, but it's just still not safe at all.
Yeah.
Especially not now in my life. I think when I was 17 and I was really stupid, I would have, been much more tempted to do that. But no. How about you?
So yes.
Of course you have.
one time, and it was actually pretty interesting. I must have been like 13, and I was at a girl's house, and it was like 3 a.m. or something, and I left. I was with my friend. And so after we left, we found ourselves on the other side of town without a ride, and we managed to, this guy picked us up. I had polka dot gloves. That's like one of the things that really stand out.
Were you in the colony? Or
No,
this Pennsylvania?
no, this was in Carrollton, so basically in this area. And this guy pulled over and he spoke no English, but he gave us a ride. We managed to like get to where we were going, and he gave us a beer when we left. It's weird. I was 13. I didn't even drink it. I was just like, I don't know. Okay, awesome.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
You definitely seem like you'd hitchhike before I would.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
So, anyways, so as we found out, Cameron, is and was a complete and total sadist. He picked Colleen up that day because he was looking specifically for a sex slave, someone that he could keep forever to torture and do with whatever he pleased. And Cameron was looking for someone that he could treat as a subhuman, like a piece of furniture, and that is exactly what he would end up doing. So before Cameron would pick up Colleen, he would torture and rape his own wife, Janice. And also before this, Janice was the one that was being treated as a subhuman, like a slave. So Cameron and Janice came to an agreement that if they could find and pick up another woman that Cameron could keep as a sex slave, Janice would no longer be treated like she had been. Cameron intended Colleen to take the place of Janice. However, Janice and Cameron would, they would remain married. Janice hoped that they could have a more normal marriage after this. Or at least I assume that she would hope for that,
Yeah, I find this really interesting. To me, this shows more of how much she was abused than anything. The fact that you could trick yourself into believing somehow you could have a normal marriage with this guy who's kidnapping women on the side of the highway.
And you're willing to just let him do that. I mean, who does that?
Right.
What kind of state of mind do you have to be in to stay married to someone who wants to kidnap and rape and torture? And by the way, we'll find this out later. We're not going to talk about it too much, but he's done this sort of thing before. And Janice claims that he even murdered a girl who's been missing for many years. So this is someone that who does these just impossible things, and she's just willing to stay with it.
Yeah, totally. There's a very weird moral aspect to this because, in a sense, Janice had honestly probably taken more abuse than Colleen. To an extent, she was also complicit in the acts herself, but
minus the box thing. I don't know if Cameron ever kept Janice's box, which is probably the worst part about this case, as we'll see. But you're right. She was definitely treated about the same as Colleen was.
I think Janice was sort of into it herself, in the fact that because she had been put down and she was treated so badly. Once she got the opportunity for those tables to turn,
I'm sure that had something to do with it.
There's a weird power dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that she did feel some power over Colleen. I mean, it's just natural for her to feel that way, I think.
Totally.
So, the first night that they got home, Cameron strung Colleen to the ceiling and proceeded to sexually assault and physically beat her. She was blindfolded during all of this, and Cameron left Colleen strung up, and Cameron and Janice had sex on the floor beneath where she was strung up. After this was done, they put Colleen into a small crate-like box and kept her there for 23 hours a day. There were holes in the box for breathing, and the 1 hour a day that she was allowed to leave the box, she was routinely raped and tortured. This again started in 1977. She was kept in this box every single day until early the next year, 1978. In early 1978, Cameron allowed Colleen to start having a little bit more time outside the box. However, he made her sign a sex slave contract, and this contract was signed in hopes that he would allow Cameron to keep an even closer eye on Colleen. Also, within this contract, it was stated that there would be no vaginal sex with Colleen from Cameron, as it breached the marriage agreement he had made with his wife. So instead, he would rape her with external instruments and torture her for his own pleasure. And I think this is so insane.
It's pretty bizarre.
And so weird on a moral stand, where he's kidnapping and raping and torturing this girl, but he won't have vaginal intercourse with her based on the marriage that he has with this lady that he's already tortured and manipulated.
It's not the torturing a human in the basement that bothers Janice. It's the vaginal sex. And I wonder where that comes from. I mean, that shows to me she was probably jealous. She was probably a jealous person, which is, pretty normal, honestly. But that just gives some insight into really what's going on with Janice and how she's starting to cope with her crazy husband. So we mentioned that there is going to be a manipulation aspect to this case, and it comes in when we find out Cameron had complete control over Colleen, and sometimes it will even seem that he has more mental control over her than physical control. Cameron invented something called the Company. This was an organization that had been invented and told to Colleen to try and basically control her. He told her that the company was watching the house at all times, and that they were watching her at all times, and watching everyone. And that if she ever tried to escape, she would be swiftly brought back to him, tortured beyond belief. At this point, the slave contract had been signed. They were being watched over by the company, and Cameron had gained full control over Colleen. He even changed her name to Kay, which is just the letter of her name, not spelled K-A-Y, just the letter K. She also had to call him master at all times, and she wasn't allowed to talk or to do anything without his permission. He had complete, full control. So in 1978, the family moved to a mobile home in Red Bluff, California. When they got to the mobile home, Cameron decided that the box that had been holding Colleen wasn't cutting it anymore, and used his carpentry skills to build a coffin-like box that fit snugly underneath their waterbed. The conditions of this box were similar to the other one, except now she could lay down when she slept. She stayed in the box for over 23 hours a day. She was fed cold scraps from the family's leftover food, and she used a bedpan to use the restroom in, which, based on the size of the wooden box she was in, would have had to be extremely hard. And I mean, just think about it, being held in a box 23 hours a day. The 1 hour you are left out of the box, you're being tortured and raped and strung up and beaten. Terrible.
Yeah, and it kind of shows. So this one's more of a coffin sized. It's the length. There's only a few inches on each side of her that she can lay, but she can actually lay in. And this goes to show how bad the last box was. As bad as this box was, the other one, she was basically knelt down in.
Mm-hmm.
So she was sitting like on her butt, and she had her legs like brought up to her. So it was like a crate that was pretty small. So she had to sit down. She couldn't lay down in that one, and she had to sleep like that for 23 hours a day.
That's insane.
Yeah, and as bad as this is, that was even worse somehow. And also, anyone ever think that she's under a waterbed?
Right.
Dude, what if that waterbed breaks?
Yeah, I mean, you're done for. And to me, it's weird that, I mean, in the beginning, we said that Cameron would treat her like a piece of furniture. And in this case, it really rings true. They moved houses, and not that I expect him to take his slave anywhere else, but he moves Colleen to the trailer in Red Bluff, no problem, just another piece of furniture. You're coming with us.
Exactly. And also, let's talk about the company, the quote-unquote company.
Right.
This is some all-watching, all-knowing organization that is keeping an eye on the family at all times, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That she completely buys into.
She completely buys into it. And this is the main part of this story, in my opinion. This is the reason why she stays there. And, later on we're going to talk about, even more of a controlled mechanism that he has over her. And this is all to do with this fictional organization that he made up and told her about.
Right.
So no matter what, she has no way to escape because she's worried if she gets out, she'll be right back because of these people, this big organization that's watching over her.
Yeah, and so I thought about this a little bit too, and honestly, I can see how she would have believed it. I mean, you would think if someone was involved in keeping some sort of like slaves in their house that they would be connected or maybe affiliated with organizations or other people that are doing this and
Yeah,
have their own
exactly.
sort of networks. I mean, it's not
Just a criminal network. It's not,
right.
yeah,
It's not a far stretch.
exactly. And this is before the days of internet and Facebook and I don't know, all the cell phones and all that sort of stuff. So
Totally.
it's not like I don't know. It's just I feel like back then it would be more believable. I don't know why. It just seems like it could be.
Yeah.
You know. So Colleen was a very devout Christian, and it was her belief in God that she says allowed her to survive and fight through everything that was happening. And so, like me and Stefan just talked about the company, this was something that, of course, he was using to control her with. And he was able to control her with this so much so that he actually allowed her to go outside of the house. And this is kind of where the Stockholm Syndrome comes in. This is when you have someone who you're keeping captive and you're torturing and you're keeping as a slave, and they are so into the story that you have made up for them, to them, that you've told them, that they won't even go even when they're alone outside of the premises. So yeah, I mean, Cameron started letting her out more and to do work around the house, to do yard work, and she was even allowed to go jogging. I guess to stay in fit. I don't really understand that. It's sort of like she's going jogging. I mean, maybe he somehow thinks, and this is true, I guess, that if she goes jogging, it will keep her in shape because otherwise she's just sitting in this box
Yeah.
most of the time, and he's also torturing her, so maybe it'd be good. Although I can't imagine I mean, maybe during this time period she's also getting more to eat as well.
Right.
So I think it sort of goes in this pattern, like he takes her. He shows that he is like a god. He can control her. He puts her in this box. He can kill her if he wants to. He tortures her all the time. He has complete control. And he introduces the company to her so she understands that he has complete control. And then once he's confident enough that she knows all of that, he allows her to go outside. Of course, she believes under the supervision of the company.
Right, yeah. She believes she's always being watched no matter what. So in 1981, 4 years later after she was originally abducted, it got to the point where Cameron was so convinced that he had Colleen under his control that he allowed Colleen to actually go to her home and visit by herself. Again, this happened in 1981. And to a certain extent, he was completely correct. He did have complete control over her because she went to visit her family and didn't say a word about what was happening to her. At this point, she believed in the company so securely, she was alone with her parents and still wouldn't say anything. This was a huge risk by Cameron, but he had confidence it would work. Her parents were very worried about her, and they believed that she was in some kind of cult because of the shabby clothes she was wearing, and the large periods she had been gone with no communication. Her parents didn't want to scare her away again, so they didn't pursue her too hard to stay. The day after she visited her parents, Cameron came along and they went back and visited again. Cameron pretended to be Colleen's boyfriend and introduced himself as such. I mean, this is some sort of crazy here.
Yeah, this is absolutely mind-blowing. This is manipulation and control to such a level we haven't, I don't think we've gone over anything like this. This is
Right.
mind-blowing. This is like they go back home to her. For one thing, so she's been gone for 4 years with no word to her parents. I mean, she hasn't been able to call them, I don't think, at this point. So no word. To her parents, she's missing,
Right.
right?
And
So-
one day she just shows up at their house
yeah, she
out
just
of the
shows
blue.
up and says what exactly? I mean, I wouldn't. If I were her parents, I feel like I would not let her go away.
Right.
I would call the police. I don't know. I mean, it's from a certain standpoint, I guess she's an adult, and at this point, she's 24 years old. So it's not like she's 17 or 18 years old. It's not like she's a child that they can keep
Right.
But it just seems like there could have been more done, because there's no way that she just joined some cult. I don't know. It's really
Well,
weird.
the time period also really you have
Yeah,
to
that's true.
put that in place because during this time this is the golden age of hippies and kids are running off all the time to go and join some sort of hippie commune or cult or what have you
Yeah.
and never be seen again. I mean, it
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you're right. It was
it
definitely
definitely wasn't
different.
abnormal for something like that to happen. However, I mean, with that being said, if I was a parent and my kid disappeared for 4 years and then just showed up,
Hmm.
and they could tell she was visibly different
Yeah.
when they saw her.
She was not the same person that had left.
Yeah, that light she had in her eyes was gone at that point.
So it must be extremely scary, you know, to be the parents in that situation, to not understand fully, and to definitely know that you're not being told the truth.
Right.
Yeah. So after Cameron and Colleen went and visited Colleen's parents, Cameron believed he had actually given her too much freedom. And so after that, he took Colleen back to the house and locked her up like he had done so before. And this time he was very strict about the 23 hours in the box. He only let her out for 1 hour a day to torture and rape her extensively. Before she was put back in the box for 23 hours a day, she had actually began helping Cameron and Janice with babysitting their kids. The kids didn't know anything about her except her name was Kay, and they were told that she went home whenever they went to bed. In reality, of course, she would go into the parents' room and be locked up in the coffin underneath their bed. In the middle of summer, by the way, the temperature inside this box would reach over 100 degrees as it was in a tiny cramped space under a bed. So again, before they went and visited her parents, the kids knew her, and they knew her as Kay, the babysitter, and they knew that she would help out around the house, and she would go home whenever they went to bed. After they visited her parents, they got back, and he couldn't trust her anymore, and so he decided to put her back in the box for the next 2 or 3 years.
Jeez.
And that's pretty interesting. It's like he gives her too much freedom, and he's almost scared.
Yeah, he's paranoid.
He's real paranoid. He has to
As
assert
he should
dominance.
be. As he should be. I mean, he's definitely committing a crime.
Yeah, he has to assert dominance and show her that he is still powerful. That he's still, which is weird because you think he would just have confidence that, dude, she didn't just tell her parents when she was
Right.
there alone. I feel like that was more of a test.
That would be a true test of
Yeah.
how much, she was willing to believe Cameron's story.
But I guess even after all that, he couldn't trust her, and I guess he couldn't trust letting her out again. Who knows?
Paranoia got to him, it seems. In 1983, Colleen was reintroduced to the children. So, Cameron started letting her out of the box more often and used her as a babysitter and maid around the house. He also let her start going out of the house again, and even allowed her to get a job as a maid at a local motel at this point. Remember, this is all within the contract stating that the company still had their eye on her wherever she went. Cameron began talking about making Colleen his second wife. This was the turning point for Janice, as strange as it is. The fact that he wanted a second wife was basically him saying that he was going to break the rules the couple had set in place, meaning that he was going to start having sex with Colleen.
And I feel like at some point, he actually had already started having vaginal sex with her. And so I think by this point, he had already been breaking that.
Right, but he
that
was open
rule.
about it now with Janice telling
Yeah.
her that, this is my idea, this is what I want to do.
And what Janice, at this point, is like, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back as far as like years of marriage and years of, abducting and torturing women. And this is what, this is the point to where she can't take it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, to Janice, I can see how this is complete betrayal because they had a guideline set up. I mean, no matter how twisted it was, they still had a set of rules they were working off with, parameters that they needed to stay within, at least for the couple's sake.
Exactly. And I guess at this point it was like, nope, this is too much. This is something that Janice just didn't want to go through with. So,
Right.
Yeah.
A year later, Janice went to Colleen and actually told her that Cameron was not a part of the company, but they actually did exist. And they weren't watching over them at all times like Cameron had told her. While out at work one day, Colleen went to the bus station and called Cameron and told him that she was leaving. Cameron reacted in a very negative way, and in the interview, she says that he starts crying and he breaks down and he's begging her to stay, basically, with the couple. I'm sure most of this was just because he was afraid of getting caught and going to prison, but 3 months went by and Colleen hadn't called the police and told them anything. And this was at the request of Janice herself. At the end of 3 months, Janice eventually called the police and told them that her husband kidnapped, tortured, and murdered a missing girl by the name of Marie Elizabeth Spanhawk. Maria disappeared in 1976 and had never been seen again. The police could not find any evidence or remains of Marie, but Janice had also told them the story of Colleen. They arrested Cameron for kidnapping and sexual assault.
Yeah, and so a little bit more about Marie Span. How'd you say that, Stephan?
Spanhawk.
Spanhawk.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Reading it was tough.
Yeah, so the Hookers picked up 19-year-old hitchhiker Marie Spanhawk in Chico, California, in early 1976. And this is just a little bit more about, they never found evidence of this, but this is something that Janice said. And this is actually something, interestingly enough, when Janice called the police, like you said, she didn't immediately tell them about Colleen. She told them about Marie. And so this, I don't know, we'll kind of go over that in a minute to see, why exactly she would do this. I mean, maybe it's because she claims that he murdered her.
Right.
But so they drove her to her intended destination. They drove Marie to her destination. But as she was getting out, Cameron grabbed her and they forced her back into the car, basically. Marie was brought to the Hooker home just like Colleen was, and she was hung from the wrist just like Colleen. She was undressed and she was tortured. And she was actually shot in the stomach with a pellet gun, and she was actually strangled by Cameron for unknown reasons. Who knows? I mean, I guess
that seems like it was his thing.
It was his thing. It could have also been quote unquote by accident, not by accident necessarily. He's obviously trying to strangle her,
right,
but maybe didn't actually intend
to kill her.
And according to Janice, the body was later buried in a shallow grave near Lassen Volcanic National Park, but it was never recovered. And the police actually suspected Marie's boyfriend, who was responsible for her disappearance, because the two of them had an argument just before she disappeared. After this, they targeted Colleen Stan.
Wow, so this guy had a clear pattern of picking women up, bringing them to his house, and basically into his torture dungeon.
And as far as we know, there's only two, is Marie and Colleen, and that's what Janice has said. But it's one of those things like, when we talk about the BTK, how much he did all of it without his family, who he loved and who loved him back,
right,
ever finding out. It was a complete shock whenever the BTK was caught. That he could have done something without Janice knowing. And who knows what he had done before he and Janice met. I mean, I guess he and Janice met at 16 years old.
Right.
So pretty early, pretty young age, but not young enough necessarily to where he couldn't have done something before that. So who knows exactly how many victims he had, but, we can assume that there was two,
right,
including Colleen. And so the police did arrest him, like you said, for kidnapping and sexual assault, and he was convicted of those charges, and he was sentenced to 104 years in prison. He was eligible for parole in 2023, but had his parole date moved up to 2015. However, he was not released on parole. His next parole hearing will be 2022.
So it's coming up.
It's coming up, 4 years. And I doubt he'll ever be released. Hope to God he's never released.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Because this is someone that I doubt he's been rehabilitated by prison, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, I'm not an expert on that sort of thing, but who knows? So who knows if he could ever be rehabilitated by anyone?
Yeah.
but I doubt he was he had that sort of treatment when he was in prison.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, American prisons aren't intended to rehabilitate at all.
Yeah, and especially not someone who's done something like this.
True.
And so I think a lot of this case really had some really crazy parts. The company, I mean, he created something that was so strong, it could control her to such a crazy extent that she never told her parents when she went home, and she was alone.
Right. He was basically a real life boogeyman for her and was able to take control over every aspect of this girl's life.
Yeah, and when we talk about how bad her torture was, that the FBI studied the case and interviewed her, and it was because she was kept locked away for 23 hours a day. I mean, non-stop for years. I mean, people that have it in, if talking about prison again, if you're in prison and something bad happens, you do something wrong, whatever, they throw you in the hole for a week. That's not that different, but it's still not as bad as how Colleen had it. And she had it for years, and she was in a tiny box that would get unbelievably hot, that she had to use the restroom in somehow, that was pitch dark, that I actually don't know how she used the restroom because she couldn't move up. She couldn't, sit up. I mean, this is the box she had a few inches above her. It's honestly, it just freaks me out thinking about it. It really does. Just put yourself into that position. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and to me, one of the most amazing things was watching one of her interviews and how she talks about it now. I mean, this lady seems completely normal after all this abuse she's gone through.
And she went through a lot of therapy because of it, of course.
Right, but she said it's been, so much time has passed that it feels like it's a different life. That's truly amazing.
Yeah, and the control aspect of it doesn't really stop there. It's, at one point, Hooker handed Colleen a gun, and she says in an interview, I didn't know if it was loaded or not, and he told me, this is to see if you'll do what I say. And he told me to put the gun in my mouth and pull the trigger, and I did. And so basically, he gave the gun to her and told her to put the gun in her own mouth and pull the trigger. And she did. I mean, she was willing to kill herself. And of course, I guess it wasn't loaded.
Right.
But this is how much control that he had over her.
Yeah, in the beginning of the show, we talked about the testament of the human will and how you're able to survive. But there's also, another aspect to it. Of how easily people can be manipulated.
Yeah, I mean, certain types of people definitely, I think, could be manipulated. Just like certain types of people have the ability to manipulate, certain types of people have the ability to be manipulated.
Yeah, agreed. Colleen seems to be like a really agreeable person to begin with. She seems like a cheery, happy person. And it's not hard to imagine someone taking advantage of her completely.
Definitely. So, like I said earlier, he was sentenced to 104 years in prison. However, and this is something that I find absolutely mind-blowing, Janice didn't get anything.
Right.
So Janice was not convicted of a single crime. And what do you think about that?
Well, the reason she didn't get in trouble is because she testified against Cameron.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the prosecution, the state was, basically said, we want him. He's who we want. Obviously, you've been troubled as well. You've been tortured. You've been sexually abused.
I mean, it's hard to say how I feel about it. It's really sort of dualistic because I feel for her and she was tortured. I mean, that's one thing we don't know, right? Like how much she really had to go through. I imagine before Colleen, it was pretty terrible. And, the couple met when they were 14 or 15.
And like you said earlier, there is a power. There had to have been some type of small power trip for her as well whenever they bring this new girl in and they start doing the same things to her that had been done. They start doing the same things to Colleen that had been done to Janice. Right. There had to have been some type of, at least small power trip.
Oh, totally. I think in one of the interviews I watched, she says that Colleen says when she got strung up, Cameron told his wife to bite Colleen, and she did. And I mean,
This dude's fucked up, man.
Yeah,
I mean, this
like,
guy is so. I want to stay sort of biased, but fuck this guy. I mean, honestly, it's just fuck this guy. He's so awful, and he's still in prison. He's still alive to this day. He's still alive. Well, when was he born? Do you remember? Was it in the early 50s? I mean, so he's probably in his 70s now.
Yeah.
And he's up for parole in 2022. Hopefully he just fucking dies.
Yeah, he'll never get it. I don't believe he will.
No, he's not gonna get it. I mean, hopefully he just dies in prison, because this dude, it's just awful. I mean, he wanted control over everyone. It's hard to believe that he didn't. Our very first episode was Gary Heidnick, and he had 6 women.
Yep.
In his basement. It's hard to believe that this guy didn't go down the same path that Gary did.
Right.
Like, it's hard to believe that. I mean, I guess he was smart enough to realize that it would have been hard to control all of these women, But he could have probably made 3 boxes and kept all 3 of them underneath his bed.
Yeah,
I mean,
it definitely would have been hard to do in a mobile home, but yeah, I thought that too. Like, what is the thing that stopped Cameron from really ramping up his fantasies, essentially? Because that's really what it is. It's like, he has a control fetish, if you will.
exactly. It was a sexual thing for him.
And allegedly a deadly fetish as well.
Yeah, exactly. And on that matter, who knows if he actually killed? But it's very.
Right.
I mean, it's very easy to believe. So
It was good enough to get him life in prison. So.
Well, he was never convicted for the murder.
Right.
But yeah. I mean, what he did to Colleen was, so. So yeah, that's the end of the episode. Who are we talking about next week, Stephan?
So next week, guys, we got a big timer. I've actually heard a couple requests from a few people saying they wanted us to do H.H. Holmes. And so next week we cover America's first serial killer.
H.H. Holmes.
Yeah, I think you guys will really enjoy it. If you haven't heard of H.H. Holmes, the story is absolutely insane. And we're going to try to do it some justice next week.
The Devil in the White City.
Indeed. That's what they call him.
So, yeah, again, we're on... Our website is strangelandpod.com. We're on Facebook if you look up the Strangeland Podcast. Our email is thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. So send us an email, add us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, do all that crap. And we're on all of the podcast apps, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, all that stuff. So check us out on anywhere you want to listen to us. Email us for requests, anything you want to do. Any type of feedback at all would be amazing.
Yeah, totally. If you guys are listening on YouTube, make sure in the comments below if you have any ideas on who we should cover next.
Just talk to us.
Yeah, let us know. We want to hear it.
All right, everybody. You have a good night.
Peace out. At the end of 3 months, Janice eventually called the police and told them that her husband had kidnapped, tortured, and murdered a missing girl by the name of Marie Elizabeth Spanhaki. How do you say that?